The woman I called Aunt Miriam for 23 years looked at me with cold eyes as she handed me a mop. Her diamond rings caught the morning light as she pointed to the muddy footprints she'd deliberately tracked across the clean floor just moments before. "Clean the basement again, Tobias. And remember, you're lucky we didn't leave you in the gutter where we found you." Those words were my daily anthem, my morning prayer, the soundtrack to my servitude. Every single day for over 2 decades, Miriam Cromwell reminded me that I was worthless, that I owed her my life, that I should be grateful for the privilege of being her unpaid servant. She'd stand at the top of the basement stairs, her silk dress rustling against the doorframe, watching me scrub the same spotless floors she'd dirty just to watch me clean them again. "Yes, Aunt Miriam," I always replied, because what else could I say? This woman had taken me in when my parents died. She'd raised me, fed me, given me shelter. So what if that shelter was a cramped room above the garage? So what if the food was usually her leftovers? So what if being raised meant working 18-hour days maintaining her sprawling estate? I was an orphan. Orphans don't get to complain. 3 days later, she was dead. I found her collapsed in her study on a Tuesday morning, her face purple, her hand clutching her chest. The papers on her desk were scattered everywhere like snow. While waiting for the ambulance, while watching this woman who'd controlled every aspect of my existence fight for her final breaths, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a folder on her desk marked Project Timothy, with my photograph paper-clipped to the front. But the name underneath the photo wasn't Tobias Renwick. It was Timothy Hartwell. At her funeral, while hundreds of Miriam's society friends dabbed at their eyes and praised her philanthropy, her lawyer pulled me into an empty room. Arthur Pemberton was a nervous man who kept adjusting his glasses like they might help him see a way out of what he had to tell me. He locked the door behind us, checked the windows, then opened his briefcase with shaking hands. "There's something you need to know," he said, pulling out a file thicker than any Bible. "Miriam Cromwell wasn't your aunt. She never was. She kidnapped you when you were 2 years old." The room started spinning. 23 years of my life, every memory, every moment of gratitude mixed with resentment, every floor I'd scrubbed thinking I was repaying a debt to family, it was all built on a lie. But Pemberton wasn't done. His next words hit harder than any of Miriam's slaps ever had. "Your real name is Timothy Hartwell. Your parents were millionaires, and they left you a $50 million trust fund. Miriam knew about the money. That's why she took you." But that wasn't even the worst part. The FBI's investigation would reveal something that changed not just my story, but the fate of 7 other stolen children. Miriam Cromwell wasn't just a kidnapper. She was part of a network that had been operating for 30 years, stealing children from wealthy families and enslaving them to steal their inheritances. And the man I'd called Uncle Gerald, who died when I was 10, Miriam had murdered him when he discovered the truth. My name is Tobias Renwick, or rather, it was. My real name is Timothy Hartwell, and this is the story of how I discovered that the woman who raised me had stolen not just my childhood, but my entire identity. This is the story of how a mop bucket and a marble floor led to the exposure of one of the largest child trafficking rings in American history. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who claim to save us are the very monsters we needed saving from. It started with those words, "You're lucky we didn't leave you in the gutter." She said them that last morning, just like she had every morning before. She stood there in her pearls and her Chanel perfume, watching me kneel on floors I'd already cleaned twice since dawn. She had no idea that in 3 days her greed would unravel. She had no idea that the boy she'd broken would be the one to expose her empire of stolen children. Or maybe she did know. Maybe that's why she tried so hard to break me completely. Maybe that's why the basement floors were never clean enough, why the silver was never polished enough, why nothing I did was ever enough. She wasn't just hiding a kidnapping, she was hiding a murder, a trafficking ring, and the stolen lives of 7 other children whose only crime was being born to wealthy parents. But here's what Miriam never understood about the gutter she claimed to have saved me from. Gutters are where the rain washes away the dirt and reveals what's been hidden underneath. And sometimes, what's underneath is the truth that brings down an entire house of lies. My earliest memory is scrubbing the marble floors of the Cromwell estate while other kids played outside. I was 5 years old, maybe 6, kneeling on bruised knees with a bristle brush that was too big for my small hands. Through the tall windows, I could see the neighbor children riding bikes down the tree-lined street. Miriam stood behind me, her heels clicking as she paced back and forth. "Circles, Tobias. Always circles. Straight lines leave streaks." I was Tobias Renwick, the orphan boy Aunt Miriam and Uncle Gerald had graciously taken in after my parents died in that terrible car accident. At least, that's what everyone believed. That's what I believed. Every morning started the same way. Miriam would bang on my door at exactly 5 a.m., not a minute later, not a minute earlier. "Get up, boy. These horses won't feed themselves, and the stables need mucking out before breakfast." The Cromwell estate sprawled across 12 acres in the wealthy part of Riverside County. There were horses I tended but never rode, gardens I maintained but never enjoyed, and a swimming pool I cleaned but never swam in. I lived in what used to be the servants' quarters, a cramped room above the garage that hadn't been updated since the 1960s. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every car that passed on the street below, and in winter, ice formed on the inside of the windows. While Miriam hosted garden parties and charity galas in the main house, I served drinks and cleaned up after her wealthy friends. She'd introduce me with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "This is Tobias, my dear late sister's boy. We took him in after the accident. Such a tragedy, losing Douglas and Helena that way, but we do what family must." The guests would nod sympathetically, compliment her generosity, and then hand me their empty glasses without making eye contact. The story was simple and tragic enough that no one questioned it. My parents, Douglas and Helena Renwick, died in a car crash on Highway 101 when I was 2 years old. They'd been coming back from a wedding in San Francisco when a drunk driver hit them head-on. Miriam was my mother's older sister, my only living relative. She'd shown me newspaper clippings of the accident, complete with a grainy photo of the mangled car. She kept a small photo album with pictures of my parents, young and smiling, holding a baby she said was me. There was even a birth certificate with her listed as my emergency contact, and documents showing she'd been granted legal guardianship. "You cost me a fortune," she'd remind me daily while I polished her silver tea service or washed her Waterford crystal. "Food, clothes, that roof over your head. Do you know what private school costs for the neighbor children? $30,000 a year. But you get your education right here, learning real skills. Other boys your age work farms for pennies. You should be grateful." And I was grateful. Despite everything, despite the 16-hour workdays, despite the locked pantry so I couldn't steal food between meals, despite the wooden spoon she'd crack across my knuckles when I broke something, I was grateful. She was family. She'd saved me from foster care, from ending up in some group home or shuffled between strangers. That's what she told me, and I believed every word. Uncle Gerald had been different, at least in the beginning. He'd sometimes slip me an extra sandwich when Miriam wasn't looking, or let me sit in his study while he worked on his papers. He was an investment banker who worked long hours, often traveling for business. But when he was home, he'd occasionally teach me things like how to balance a checkbook or read the stock market pages in the newspaper. "Education is important, Tobias," he'd say quietly, always glancing toward the door like Miriam might appear. When I was 10, Uncle Gerald died suddenly of a heart attack. He'd been working in his study late one night when Miriam heard a crash. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. After that, any small kindnesses in the house died with him. Miriam became harder, colder, more demanding. She sold his book collection that I'd loved to browse, converted his study into another sitting room, and burned his personal papers in the backyard while I watched. School was a particularly cruel fiction. Miriam had told the district she was homeschooling me, and she did teach me enough to pass the state's basic requirements. 2 hours each morning, she'd drill me on reading, writing, and arithmetic before putting me to work. But while other kids learned history and science, played sports, and joined clubs, I learned how to repair a leaking roof, resurface a driveway, and maintain industrial kitchen equipment. When I turned 18, I made the mistake of asking about college. Everything changed when Miriam had her stroke. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, and I was trimming the hedges along the front walkway when I heard the crash from inside the house. The sound of breaking glass was followed by a heavy thud that shook the windows. I dropped the hedge clippers and ran inside, finding Miriam collapsed in the study, her body twisted awkwardly between the desk and the bookshelf. Papers were scattered everywhere, floating down like oversized confetti from the folders she'd pulled off the shelf as she fell. While waiting for the ambulance, while checking her pulse and trying to remember the CPR training I'd taught myself from a library book, I noticed something that made my hands freeze. Among the scattered papers was a folder marked Project Timothy in red ink. My photograph was paperclipped to the front, the same school photo Miriam had taken of me when I was 7, the one where she'd made me smile by promising ice cream I never received. But underneath the photo, written in her precise handwriting, wasn't my name. It was Timothy Hartwell, subject number 8. The paramedics burst through the door before I could examine it further. They worked on Miriam with professional efficiency, inserting IVs and attaching monitors while barking medical terminology into their radios. At the hospital, she regained consciousness just long enough to grab my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were wild with fear, not the cold calculation I'd seen my whole life, but genuine terror. "The safe," she whispered, her breath sour with medication and panic. "Behind the portrait in my bedroom. Burn everything in it. Promise me, Tobias. Burn it all. Don't let them find it." Before I could respond, before I could even ask what she meant, the monitors started screaming. The doctors rushed in, pushing me aside as they worked to restart her heart. They tried for 20 minutes, using electricity and chemicals and chest compressions that cracked her ribs. But Miriam Cromwell, the woman who'd controlled every minute of my existence for 23 years, was gone. Her lawyer found me in the waiting room 3 hours later. Arthur Pemberton was a thin, nervous man in his 60s who kept adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses and loosening his tie like it was strangling him. "Mr. Renwick, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. Your aunt was a remarkable woman." He glanced around the empty waiting room, then leaned closer. "We need to discuss the estate immediately. Your aunt left very specific instructions that were to be carried out upon her death." He paused, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "But first, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone else contacted you in the last few days? Any strangers asking questions about you or your aunt? Anyone claiming to be from the government?" I shook my head, confused by his urgency. That's when I made the mistake of mentioning the folder I'd seen. There was something strange in her study when she collapsed, a folder with my picture but a different name on it. Timothy something. Pemberton went pale. He actually staggered backward and had to grab the wall for support. "You saw the Timothy file? Oh God, this is bad." He fumbled for his phone, started to dial a number, then stopped. "Listen to me very carefully, Tobias. After the funeral, you and I need to have a serious conversation. Do not go back to the house alone. Do not open that safe she mentioned. And whatever you do, if anyone approaches you claiming to be FBI, don't say a word until I'm present." The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 3 days after Miriam's death. Those 3 days were the strangest of my life. For the first time in 23 years, no one woke me at 5 a.m. No one demanded I scrub floors or polish silver. I sat in that empty house, afraid to touch anything, afraid to look for that safe, afraid to even sleep in case this was all some elaborate test Miriam had designed. Hundreds of people attended the funeral. The mayor gave a speech about Miriam's contributions to the community. The president of her charity foundation called her a saint who dedicated her life to helping others. Woman after woman from her social circle dabbed their eyes and told stories about her generosity. I stood there in Uncle Gerald's old suit, the only one I owned, listening to them describe a woman I'd never met. Such a shame about the inheritance situation. I overheard one of Miriam's friends whisper to another during the reception, "All that money going to the boy, $60 million, and she leaves it to him instead of the foundation. $60 million. The woman who'd counted every slice of bread I ate, who'd made me wear shoes until they literally fell apart, who'd claimed she couldn't afford to send me to college, had been worth $60 million. After the burial, Pemberton led me to his office in downtown Riverside. It was a small building squeezed between a dental practice and an insurance company, the kind of place you'd drive past 1,000 times without noticing. He locked the door behind us, pulled down the blinds, and even unplugged his phone from the wall. His hands shook as he opened a wall safe hidden behind a painting of a lighthouse. "What I'm about to tell you might destroy everything you believe about your life," he said, pulling out a thick folder bound with rubber bands. I've been Miriam's lawyer for 15 years, but I only discovered the truth 6 months ago when she came to me about updating her will. She was getting paranoid, talking about people watching her, asking me about statute of limitations for various crimes. He spread the contents of the folder across his desk like he was dealing cards for the world's worst poker game. The first thing he showed me was a missing child poster from 21 years ago. The boy in the photo looked exactly like my childhood pictures. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, even the same crooked smile. Above the photo, in bold letters, "Missing, Timothy Hartwell, age 2. "Your real name is Timothy Hartwell," Pemberton said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your parents were Roland and Grace Hartwell. They weren't killed in a car accident. They died in a private plane crash coming back from a business trip to Seattle. They were venture capitalists, very successful, worth about $70 million at the time of their death." My legs gave out. I collapsed into the chair across from his desk, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. But Miriam showed me newspaper clippings, photos of the car accident. She had documents, a birth certificate. Pemberton pulled out those exact items from another folder. "Look closer at the newspaper clippings." He handed me a magnifying glass. "See how the date looks slightly off? The font doesn't quite match. She had these fabricated by someone she knew in the printing business. The birth certificate is real, but altered. Modern forensics would catch it immediately, but 20 years ago, who would think to check?" He showed me real newspaper articles about the Hartwell plane crash. There were photos of my actual parents, and the resemblance was undeniable. Roland had my same sharp jawline and serious expression. Grace had given me her green eyes and the way one eyebrow lifted slightly higher than the other when confused. They looked young, successful, happy. They looked like the kind of parents who would have loved their son. "When you were 2, they left you with your grandmother, Evelyn Hartwell, while they took that business trip. You were supposed to be safe. A week after the funeral, you disappeared from a family gathering at your grandmother's estate in Boston. Everyone thought you'd wandered off and fallen into the lake. They dragged it for weeks. Search teams combed the woods for months. Your grandmother never gave up hope, but after 5 years, the FBI declared you likely deceased." "My grandmother is alive?" The words came out strangled. All this time I'd had family, real family, and they thought I was dead. Pemberton nodded gravely. "She's 83 now, still living in Boston. She hired private investigators for 20 years. She never stopped looking for you. She even suspected Miriam once because they were distant acquaintances through the business world. Your father's firm had done some investing with Gerald's bank. But when investigators came to question Miriam, she had such an elaborate backstory, such convincing documentation, that even the FBI cleared her. The full picture was starting to come together in my mind like a horrible jigsaw puzzle. She knew my parents. She knew about their money. She took me at that gathering. She was Gerald's secretary at the investment firm that managed the Hartwell Trust," Pemberton confirmed. "She knew exactly how much you were worth. The trust your parents set up was ironclad, $50 million that you'd receive at age 25, managed by trustees until then. But there was a provision. If you died or remained missing until age 25, the money would go to various charities. However, Miriam found a loophole." He pulled out a legal document covered in sticky notes and highlighted sections. "If someone could produce you alive at age 25 and prove they'd been your caretaker for a substantial period, they could claim guardian compensation, up to half the trust value. She was going to wait until your 25th birthday, 2 years from now, then suddenly discover your true identity." She was going to pretend she just found out? My voice was rising. After 23 years of slavery? Pemberton's expression darkened further. "I don't think she ever planned to tell you the truth, Tobias. I found correspondence in her files about forging documents, about powers of attorney, about what happens to trust funds when the beneficiary is declared mentally incompetent. I think she was going to claim the money, and then you would have had an unfortunate accident." Pemberton called the FBI from his office phone while I sat there trying to remember how to breathe. Within an hour, his small office was filled with federal agents. The lead investigator, Agent Diane Foley, was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She'd been working cold cases for 15 years, and the Timothy Hartwell disappearance had been one of her first assignments as a rookie agent. "We need DNA confirmation," she said, swabbing the inside of my cheek with practiced efficiency. "But if you're really Timothy Hartwell, this is the break we've been waiting for. Your grandmother has kept your case active for 2 decades. She calls our Boston office every year on the anniversary of your disappearance." The test results came back in less than 24 hours. When Agent Foley walked back into Pemberton's office with a thick file under her arm, her expression told me everything before she even spoke. "You're definitely Timothy Hartwell. 99.9% match to the DNA samples your grandmother provided years ago, but that's when this investigation took an even darker turn." She sat down across from me and opened the file. "We executed a search warrant on the Cromwell estate last night. We found the safe your aunt mentioned. Inside were documents that change everything about this case." She spread 7 photographs across the desk. 7 children, all between the ages of 2 and 4, all smiling innocently at the camera. Over the past 30 years, 7 other children from wealthy families went missing under similar circumstances. All presumed dead. All had substantial trust funds. We found correspondence between Miriam and an underground network that specialized in what they called rehoming kidnapped children to people who could exploit their inheritances. My stomach turned. Other children? There were others like me? Agent Foley nodded grimly. Benjamin Ashford, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, vanished from a park in 1996. Sarah Chen, whose parents owned a tech company, disappeared from her daycare in 2001. Marcus Delacroix, whose family owned hotel chains, went missing during a beach vacation in 2003. She pointed to each photo as she spoke. The list goes on. All of them had trust funds worth tens of millions. All of them disappeared without a trace. "But where are they now?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. "We're investigating. 3 of them we've already located. They're alive, living situations similar to yours. One is working as an unpaid ranch hand in Montana, believing he's repaying a debt to his uncle. Another is basically a servant to a woman in Florida who claims to be her godmother. The third is in Maine, maintaining estates for his supposed adoptive father. They all believe their parents died in accidents. They all believe they're orphans who should be grateful." She pulled out another document, this one a coroner's report. "But Tobias, we also found something else in that safe. Gerald Cromwell didn't die of a heart attack. We had his body exhumed last night. The preliminary toxicology report shows massive amounts of potassium chloride in his system. It causes heart attacks that look natural if you don't know to test for it." The room started spinning. "Miriam killed him?" "We found journal entries in Gerald's handwriting hidden in the safe. He'd discovered what she'd done. He found documents about your real identity and was planning to go to the police. The last entry was dated the day before his death. He wrote, 'I cannot be married to a monster anymore. Tomorrow I tell the FBI everything, and I face whatever consequences come. That boy deserves to know who he really is.'" Agent Foley pulled out a tablet and showed me a video. "We also found this security footage from a gas station near the Boston estate the day you disappeared. It's grainy, but enhancement technology has improved since then." The video showed a younger Miriam carrying a small boy to a car. The child was crying, reaching back toward something off camera. That child was me. "There's more," Foley continued. "Your grandmother Evelyn is waiting outside. She flew in from Boston the moment we confirmed your DNA. She's been in the parking lot for 3 hours, too nervous to come in without your permission." I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. "She's here? My grandmother is here?" When Evelyn Hartwell walked through that door, I knew it was real. She had my eyes, the same unusual shade of green, the same way they crinkled at the corners. She looked at me and tears streamed down her weathered face. "Timothy, my sweet boy, I knew you were alive. I knew it. A grandmother knows." She pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. She smelled like lavender and vanilla, and her hands shook as she touched my face like she was making sure I was real. From her purse, she pulled out a worn photo album held together with rubber bands. "I've carried this every day for 21 years, she said, opening it to show dozens of photos. My real parents at their wedding, my first birthday party with a massive cake, my mother holding me at the hospital right after I was born. My father teaching me to walk in a sunny garden. Your parents loved you more than life itself. The night before they died, your mother called me. She said, "Mom, promise me if anything happens, you'll make sure Timothy knows he was loved." I've waited 2 decades to keep that promise. The FBI investigation uncovered the entire network over the next 6 months. 12 people were arrested across 5 states, including the woman who had forged documents for Miriam, the private investigator who helped her track wealthy families with young children, and the corrupt social worker who had helped falsify adoption papers. 3 of the 7 missing children were found alive, living similar lives to mine. Benjamin Ashford was 32, working 18-hour days on a ranch in Montana, believing he owed his uncle for saving him from foster care. Sarah Chen was 28, serving as an unpaid housekeeper in Florida. Marcus Delacroix, 25, maintained 3 estates in Maine for his supposed adoptive father. The other 4 had died under suspicious circumstances over the years. Their captors claimed accidents or sudden illnesses, but the FBI found evidence of murder in at least 2 cases. These children never made it to the age when their trust funds would mature. They were killed when their captors realized the legal loopholes wouldn't work, or when the children started asking too many questions. I inherited not just the $50 million trust fund my parents left me, but also Miriam's entire estate. The law, in its strange irony, considered me her next of kin since I'd lived as her nephew for 23 years. The $60 million she'd hoarded while making me wear shoes held together with duct tape was now mine. I sold the mansion immediately, but first I stood in that basement I'd cleaned thousands of times and realized every moment of misery had been orchestrated. Every cruel word had been calculated to break my spirit. Every beating had been designed to make me too afraid to question my story. My grandmother, Evelyn, and I used the money to establish the Hartwell Foundation for Missing Children. We work with the FBI to investigate cold cases, particularly those involving wealthy families whose children disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In our first year alone, we've helped reunite 6 families. Each time I see a parent embrace their lost child, I think about all the years Miriam stole from my grandmother and me. 21 years of her wondering if I was cold, if I was hungry, if I was loved. 21 years of me not knowing that someone out there was desperate to find me. The hardest part wasn't learning the truth about my identity. It was accepting it. For months after the revelation, I'd still wake up at 5 a.m., my body programmed to start working before dawn. I'd flinch when someone raised their voice, expecting Miriam's hand across my face. I'd feel guilty for eating a full meal, hearing her voice in my head calling me greedy and ungrateful. Dr. Patricia Vance, my therapist, explained that I'd been psychologically tortured for over 2 decades. "Your brain was wired for survival, not for living," she said. Every neural pathway was shaped by abuse. Rewiring takes time, patience, and tremendous courage. But here's what Miriam never understood in all her careful planning and cruel manipulation. She might have stolen my childhood, but she couldn't steal my spirit. Every floor I scrubbed taught me the value of hard work. Every insult I endured taught me the power of kindness. Every night I went to bed hungry taught me compassion for those who suffer. The boy she tried to destroy became the man who exposed her crimes. The fortune she killed to steal now funds the salvation of other stolen children. I keep one photo from my old life on my desk at the foundation. It shows me at age 10, standing beside a small vegetable garden I'd secretly planted behind the servants' quarters. Miriam had forbidden it, said I was wasting water and time, but I'd grown tomatoes, peppers, and squash, and when she wasn't watching, I'd take the vegetables to the homeless shelter downtown. Even in captivity, even believing her lies, some part of me knew there was good in the world worth preserving. Some part of me refused to let her darkness extinguish my light. My real name is Timothy Hartwell. I'm 24 years old now, with my whole life ahead of me. I survived being kidnapped, enslaved, and gaslit for 2 decades. But I'm not a victim anymore. I'm proof that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. I'm evidence that evil might win battles, but good wins wars. And sometimes, the very cruelty meant to break us becomes the strength that helps us save others. The FBI agent asked me once if I wished I'd never learned the truth. Would it have been easier to remain Tobias Renwick, the grateful orphan? No, I told her without hesitation. Living a lie, Even a comfortable one is still a prison. Miriam taught me that family isn't blood, it's choice. She chose greed. I choose justice. And every child we bring home proves that love is stronger than evil, truth stronger than lies, and hope stronger than any cage ever built. If this story touched you, if it opened your eyes to the unimaginable things that can happen behind closed doors, please like this video and share it with others. Your support helps these stories reach more people and raises awareness about missing children and human trafficking. Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of survival, justice, and triumph over darkness. Remember, you might be the person who recognizes a child in need. You might be the one who makes the call that saves a life. Stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop believing that truth will always find its way to light.